Hi, welcome to valuationpodcast.com, a podcast and video series about all things related to business and valuation. My name is Melissa Gragg, and I provide divorce, mediation, and valuation services in St. Louis, Missouri. Today, we'll discuss business value drivers with John Warilow. He is the founder of the Value Builder System, which is a practice management software for business advisors. And he has a best-selling book called Built to Sell, Creating a Business That Can Thrive Without You. It was recognized by both Fortune and Inc. magazine as one of the best business books and has been translated into 12 languages. He's also written a few more books that we'll talk to you later about. But prior to founding the Value Builder System, he started and exited 4 different companies, including one acquired by a public company. He lives with his family in Toronto, and you can follow him by signing up at builttosell.com. He also has a podcast, and we'll talk more about that as well. But you said something interesting about the person's name was within the title of the business.
Yeah.
Do you have any, I have some feelings about that, but do you have any feelings about what you've seen as clients sell? Is that important or not?
Yeah, it can be important on a couple of different levels, and I'm sure you've seen it in your own work. It does beg the question, how easily can this business be separated from the founder, the owner, the namesake? So it discounts your valuation based on the fact that it's hard to separate, number one. The other piece that I think is important here is that psychologically for an entrepreneur, it can be hard to leave your company if your surname is in the name of the business. So we have a tool called Prescore where we measure the owner's personal readiness to exit, psychological readiness to exit their company. And we know that if the company name is their surname or has their surname inside, it's psychologically more difficult for them to leave. So not only does naming your company have with your own surname in it discount to some extent the valuation, it also makes it harder for you to leave, because it's hard if you're like John Doe and Sons Bakery and you sell and you see John Doe and Sons vans and trucks driving all around town and they're driving too fast, or they're clipping corners, or the guy driving doesn't look great or whatever. This is your namesake that you've sold, and it becomes very hard to do that. So here's what I would say. I mean, if you've named your company, there's a huge cost to changing the name of your company. And that may, depending on how much brand equity you've created in that name, it may be just too much to bear. So what I would suggest you do in that case is to really focus on branding your products. Like if we think about, like Johnson & Johnson owns a brand called Band-Aid. You might argue that Band-Aid is a much more prominent brand than Johnson & Johnson. Johnson & Johnson were actually 2 brothers, right? Like they are 2 people, but the brand has far eclipsed the equity in those 2 individuals' names over hundreds of years, to now that we appreciate the brands within the Johnson & Johnson family. So Band-Aid as an example. So if your name appears in your company name, I mean, one option is to change your company name. I don't think you have to go to that extent. I think you can start to elevate your products such that they take first billing in your branding and marketing, and your company name starts to become secondary. And I think you can somewhat bridge that gap. I don't know, Melissa, what have you seen? Like, what advice do you give people where their surname is in the company name?
Well, I think it's a hard position, like melissagragg.com. Does John want to buy melissagragg.com and run that operation? And every time they're like, oh, I went to melissagragg.com, but Melissa Gragg wasn't there, and so
she must not care about me.
Right. She doesn't care about me. She's moved on. And it creates, but if you look at institutional companies, that's what happens. They keep these partners on like indefinitely. Like everybody knows that they're not doing. Melissa Gragg is retired and living in Florida. Everybody knows that, but they keep him as the figureheads on the company because that's what they created and things like that. If you have, all of these things. So in my mind, branding on keywords, branding on words that would be kind of transmutable and somebody could take it on or incorporate it, I think, like incorporate the entire name into their organization, I think is more sellable, because if you create all of the pipeline, all of the pipeline around your business is melissagragg.com, right? It really, it not only from a theoretical standpoint prevents people from coming in, right? So I probably can't build as quickly because people are like, oh, where do you work? melissagragg.com. It's like, oh, how much do you interact with that company? Well, not much. It's really about Melissa Gragg. You know what I'm saying? So I think that people have a love for their name and a love for their legacy. And so they kind of have this habitual thing to put their name in the business. But I see that most of the time it is upsetting to business owners when that company literally comes in and doesn't keep the name, and just kind of takes the customers or does whatever, because they are coming in with a name that they have built. And so, sometimes you can have a merger of names and things like that. But I think right now we are in a time period where we're going to see a lot of people start to make their way on their own, and I think that there is some intention at the beginning of how you name this, how you wrap around the social media, how you get known. There's a lot of, in the marketing world, there's a lot of branding concepts around personal branding versus corporate branding. I think all of these things are important, but a buyer is not going to necessarily want that name. So you're going to spend all this time and effort to create something that is not going to be of value to the buyer.